Throughout the 18th century and certainly after the Battle of Trafalgar, the British ruled the waves. The British Army conquered territories while the Royal Navy sustained them. Their massive empire was scattered across a quarter of the world's landmass, and getting from place to place was often difficult. Going all the way around Africa to get to India was a drain on resources, so when the Suez Canal, a passage from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, was completed in 1869, the British immediately set their sights upon exerting their influence over Egypt. The 1870s were marked with incursions into Egypt, which was an autonomous province for the Ottoman Empire. The British, in a sense, were stepping over the local authorities, undermining them by coercing the Egyptian government to give them more privileges. This all changed when in 1882, the Viceroy of Egypt, Tewfik Pasha, was deposed by the more anti-European Ahmed al-Rabi, who seized Alexandria. Tewfik appealed to the British, who bombarded and seized Alexandria. Major General Garnet Wolseley seized the Suez Canal, marching east. Wolseley crushed al-Rabi's forces at the Battle of Tel el-Kebir. British cavalry seized Cairo, and al-Rabi was forced to surrender and was sentenced to death. On paper, Egypt remained a province of the Ottoman Empire, but in practice, Egypt and Sudan had become British protectorates. Tewfik was a little more than a figurehead puppet, and now the British were overlords of the Suez Canal. British officers were sent to train the locals to use the newest equipment and tactics available for the time, and many British divisions were devoted towards garrisoning the Suez and other important Egyptian cities to ensure British interests were kept secure. However, locals were not happy with British governance. Having enjoyed large amount of autonomy for decades, the Egyptian people did not react well to the new great power being thrust upon them. As dissent for the British grew, a Sudanese local named Muhammad Ahmed began rallying tribesmen to an anti-British cause. Ahmed claimed to be the Mahdi, the prophesied Islamic Messiah, who is said to rule the world and rid it of evil. He used this claim to rally many ostracized and poverty-stricken Sudanese, who hoped to see the British thrown back into the sea. His army became known as the Mahdi's forces. After gaining enough support, he won a victory over the 4,000-man Egyptian garrison at El Obeid, arming his forces with the Fallen's rifles. Ahmed won to this point his greatest victory at Shaken, where he defeated a 10,000-man Egyptian force led by British Colonel William Hicks. Nearly the entire force was either killed or taken prisoner, and with this victory, Ahmed occupied a majority of the Sudan. The British most likely considered this rebellion more of an annoyance than anything. The Sudan was lightly populated with few natural resources and desolate terrain. It was not a very valuable province, though their international prestige was taking a hit, so they devised a new strategy. They began pulling forces from the front, reorganizing them at the Khartoum, where Major General Charles George Gordon would organize a counter-offensive. However, as about 7,000 Egyptian forces arrived at the Khartoum, so did Ahmed with 50,000 warriors on the 13th of March 1884. Some preparations for the siege had been made. Barricades along the buildings had been set up and enough food had been gathered to last them more than enough time. Many British believed that the initial rush of support for Ahmed would fall, but after 10 months of bombardment at the Khartoum, they weren't so sure of that. When word reached Ahmed that a large relief force was marching under the command of now four-star General Wolseley, he was determined to take Khartoum. Mahdi's forces attacked the city walls around midnight on the 26th of January, 1885. The assault went on for a few hours, but was ultimately repulsed. A few waves went on during the day, but the assault probably took place around 3:30 p.m. Landmines and barbed wire resulted in the deaths of thousands of Mahdi's forces, as well as constant gunfire from the Egyptian forces, but they eventually reached the inner parts of the city. They were so numerous that they fully engulfed the city. The defenders fought as well as they could, but due to a starvation and occasional disease, they were physically weakened and fighting poorly in melee combat. The entire garrison fought to the last man, and not a single man, including Gordon, stood standing at the end. 4,000 townsmen were slaughtered, while probably double that number were taken as slaves. Ahmed had successfully overthrown British rule in one of their most essential territories. He established his own religious state, Mahdist Sudan, which ruled over much of modern Sudan. The British were infuriated that was once seen as a petty uprising had turned into a full-scale rebellion. After the initial shock had set in, they made their preparations to avenge Gordon, who was seen as a martyr in Britain, a hero who died for crown and country. A year after the defeat at Khartoum, Lieutenant Colonel Horatio Herbert Kitchener landed with 8,000 professional and experienced British regulars, intent on re-establishing British governance over Sudan. Augmented by 18,000 European-trained Egyptians, Kitchener marched on Sudan, intent on making an example of the world of what happens when you rebel against the British Empire. This army would meet the full force of Mahdi Sudan at Omdurman, but that's a story for another video, which will be covered in this documentary series, Scramble for Africa. Make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. Please consider supporting the channel on Patreon, as it is the best way to help the channel and make sure we continue to put out quality documentaries like this one. I've been Goat the Creator, from History Reforged. Thanks for watching.